Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
We are a part of the way through a long, and it's not really complicated. It's just it's a many references Rashi. The point that he's making is actually somewhat uncomplicated, particularly for those who study a little bit of Hebrew grammar. What he's describing, we kind of know either by being able to explain it or just by recognizing it. I want to read the verse to remind us of where we are, and then jump into the Rashi. And then at some point, I'm going to put Joanna on the spot, who's basically done a master's thesis worth of research on this topic since the last class, and has come up with some really interesting insights into why it might be that Rashi is spending so much time on what we might consider a rather small point. But let me rev us up, and I do promise that we'll get through this today, and we can put this chapter behind us, literally and figuratively. So the verse is the 22nd verse of the third chapter of Exodus. We're so far away from the content as we've been discussing the grammar. Remind us the content for Shala Isha Mishchinta. God says through Moshe that each Israelite woman on the way out of Egypt will ask from her neighbor, Mikarat Beita, and from the one who lives in her home. We won't go back into the different possible meanings of that. Klei chesef u'klei zahav, instruments of silver and gold, usmalot, and garments. V'samtem al bnechem, you will put them on your sons, v'al and on your daughters. The ni tzaltem et Mitzrayim, focused on the ni, not because it's a Monty Python movie. We're not the knights who say ni, but this is the verb that says ni. The ni tzaltem et Mitzrayim, and you will blank the Egyptians, right? And from context, we know what it means. You will strip, remove from, take advantage of, exploit. And what Rashi is arguing against and for doesn't change the meaning that much, right? It's either, according to the medieval grammarian that Rashi sometimes refers to, Menachem ben Saruk, the root is Hey Tzadi Lamed or Yud Tzadi Lamed or just Tzadi Lamed, from the word that we know, lahatzil, to remove, to rescue, to save. So it's as if you're rescuing the stuff from the Egyptians so that it belongs to you. Or the root is nun tzadi lamed, which means to take advantage of or to exploit, right? Either way, we know what's going on. So this discursus that Rashi is involved in is not really changing the tone that much of the verse, but it's maybe setting up, and here I am setting up Joanna, setting up a principle that Rashi wants us to know, so that when we come across this situation later on, we'll have memorized this, 14-line Rashi, and we'll know how to handle it, right? So I'm gonna say where we are in the Rashi. Then I'm gonna ask. Let's finish the Rashi, and then Joanna, if you're comfortable, I'd love for you to share some of the insights you share with me in email, because they were fascinating, and I'm amazed by what you have come up with. And I'm going to apologize to Joanna publicly that for some bizarre reason I started placing Joanna in Ottawa, even though she's in Toronto. I have no idea why. And apparently for weeks I've been making reference to the fact that we have students in Los Angeles and in Ottawa, Canada, and there's nothing wrong with Ottawa, but she's in Toronto, and I apologize to all the Torontonians that I may have insulted by suggesting that someone would move from Toronto to Ottawa. Okay, so where are we in the Rashi? Rashi has told us what he thinks the word means, and now he has said that Menachem ben Saruk, this previous medieval grammarian, says that this is from the root meaning tzal, lehatzil, yatzal, to save or to rescue. And Rashi says no. And why is it a no? Because the vowel underneath the nun in our verse, v'ni tzaltem, is a chirik, the dot saying an ih sound, not the shva saying the two dot sound. And he basically says to us, when verbs like the ones he is talking about, Menachem ben Saruk, are in when there's a chirik in those verbs, not a shva, it doesn't mean an active verb, it means a passive verb. It's suggesting that something has been happening to them, not they're the ones doing it. And so where we are is, I think, example number 2 or 3, with verbs that look like ours, that have a chirik underneath the nun, and basically Rashi proving that if you want to read it as being from a root where the nun is actually not part of the root, you are forced to read it passively. And the example we're at is Ezekiel 22:21. So let me pull that up. So in Ezekiel 22:21, we're not going to go into the context of Ezekiel, but we have this verse. V'chi nasti etchem, I will gather you, Beit Knesset lichnos, v'nafachti alechem, I'm going to blow upon you, be'esh, evrati, the fire of my anger, v'ni tachtem betocha. That looks like our verb. Nun is after the vav ha'ipuch, nun is the first letter. The vowel underneath the nun is an e, and there is no way to explain this other than to say that that the Israelites are going to be melted, not by fire, not that you will melt. Right? There's no way to say the nitachtem is you are going to melt. It has to be you will be melted. Right? So if you will be melted, then this is another proof that when there's a chirik under the nun, that you have to understand it as passive if you want to understand the root as not having the nun be an essential part of it. Okay, that was the one that we were on. I didn't actually assign a reader to this, and I might as well because we're going to be going through this. I don't know. Matt, do you want to pick up at basically you're just going to read 2-word phrases from the Bible that I'm going to put the screen up, but why don't you be our reader, the one after Ezekiel, the Amartem?
Hold on a second. V'amartem nitzalnu.
Right. So, similar situation, Jeremiah 7, verse 10, it's on your screen. Look at the verse. Uvatem, you're going to come. Va'amaratem, and you're going to stand, lefanai, in front of me. Babayat hazeh, and this, capital B bayat. Asher nikra shmi alav, upon which my voice is, or my name is called. Va'amartem, and you're going to say, ni tzalnu, right? There's no way to understand this verse other than to mean that you're going to say, we're okay, we have been saved, passive. We call it the nifal in our modern language of discussing Hebrew grammar. There's no way to understand that as we are doing the saving, right? So if you want to read that verse as having to do with saving, it's passive. If you want to read that verse as having to do with exploiting, then sure. But that would mean that we exploited. Doesn't make sense here. Okay, so another proof text. Go back into the Rashi.
Lishon nifalnu.
Right, so pause. So when Rashi says the lashon nifalnu, the way a modern Hebrew grammar teacher would say, this is the binyan of nifal. All of these verbs are in the binyan of nifal, passive, where the subject is having something done to it or to him or to her, or to them, rather than active. So he doesn't use the word nifal. He kind of almost conjugates the name of the binyan to match the conversation. So he calls it a nifalnu. Okay, go ahead.
V'chol nun shehi va'a b'teva lefrakim v'nofelet mimena.
Translate that again.
All right. And every nun that comes in the box, the teva, the ark.
The word.
It means something else. In the word. Okay. And every nun that comes in the word, lefrakim, in pieces.
Yeah, no. Lefrakim is an interesting rabbinic word. It means occasionally.
Occasionally. Okay.
From time to time, as it were.
Right. And drops out of it.
Right. Okay. Like.
For example, kanun shel nogev, nose, noten, noshech. For example, the nun in nogev is to infect.
Yeah, or to be a plague, right? Or to smell.
Nose, to carry.
Nose, pluripotent Hebrew verb, to carry, to bear, to bless, to lift up, right? That's Parshat Naso. That's Yisa Adonai Panav Elecha. The nun falls out.
Noten.
Right? Like it becomes Yitain.
And Noshech, to bite.
Right. Okay. So Rashi says, you, reader, know all these roots. They all begin with nun. He doesn't even have to tell us, doesn't even have to give us examples where the nun falls out because he knows that we know, or he assumes that we know.
Right.
All those, kshehi.
Kshehi medaberet lishon ufa'altem tinaked b'chatav. So when it is speaking in the way of ufa'altem, and you worked.
What would we call that if this was a modern Hebrew grammar class? When those roots are being used,
that would be the active.
Pa'al. That's Rashi's way of saying Pa'al. If you study the Binyanim, the 7 Binyanim, this is Rashi's way of saying Pa'al, except again he conjugates it as in the form. So when these words and words like them are in the form of Pa'al, now here we have a very interesting little a parentheses within the parentheses as a manuscript issue, because I'm actually looking at 3 different Rashis right now. The one you read says that after the word tinaked, you have what word?
Tinaked bechataf.
You have tinaked bechataf. Which Rashi? Which Rashi are you looking at? Can you see the book?
Sefaria.
Okay. The one that we have in the Eitz Chaim, the Torah Chaim is tinaked bishva bechataf, which is weird because it uses the word shva, but spells the word shva differently than we would. Shva is the 2 dots, right? Like the English vowel shwa, right? Bechataf. And in the other one I have, it doesn't have the word bishva at all. It's just bechataf. Sorry, it doesn't have the word bechataf at all. It has bishva. So whatever it is, it's clearly Rashi's way of denoting these 2 dots, but apparently it hasn't always been referred to as a shva. It was referred to as a chataf, as in a chataf patach or a chataf kamatz, right? Whenever you have this vowel and 2 dots next to it, or this vowel and 2 dots next to it, it's called a chataf patach or a chataf kamatz. I feel like I'm in a nursery rhyme. It's more understood as like a vowel. A chataf means to snatch away, right? So a vowel whose full vowelness has been snatched away, limited by the shva, but we refer to it as a shva. Okay, end parentheses. Basically,
can you explain the very brief footnote?
Please.
No, can you explain it?
The footnote in the Eitz Chaim. I didn't look at it. Let me take a look quickly. Okay, this is reading it cold. I didn't look at this one. Kolomar, which is to say, no. Which footnote are you looking at?
It's footnote 1, and it's Yud Ship Gimel.
Oh.
And this is tinaked bechataf.
Yud Gimel means yesh gorsim. Some versions of this text read it as tinaked bechataf. It's a manuscript comment. Yesh gorsim. There's some who read it as, just as I said, where in some versions of this, either the word shva is missing or the word chataf is missing. Joanna?
Interestingly, the Sefaria translation refers to this as the vocal shva. So I'm wondering if the use of the word chataf is specific to designate the shvana as opposed to the shvanach.
That's really interesting. And for those who don't understand that distinction, these 2 dots, there are 2 versions of it. The shvanach, the resting shva, like the 2 dots under the letter sin in Yisrael, it ends the vowel Yisrael, and the shvana, which is anytime there's a shva at the beginning of a word, it's a shva with a little bit of sound, right? You can't say like the word we're looking at v'ata. It's v'ata. You have to give it a little bit of a vowel sound, right? So you're saying that it's possible that this is Rashi's way of referring not just to the shva, but the shvana. Interesting.
The Nitzotem has one of each, right? It's got the shvana and then the shvanach.
Yes, by coincidence, that word has one of each. Correct. The shva under the vav is a shvana. It's a moving shva, and the shva under the lamed is a resting shva. Okay, so to go back to Matt and his reading, that Rashi is saying these roots, when there is a nun, if it would have been active, it would have had a shva underneath it, maybe a shvana, and now he's going to give us examples of these. Kegon,
u'nesatem et avichem, Bereshit memeh.
So look at this on the screen already. Genesis 45, verse 19. V'ata tzuveti, you've all been commanded. Zot asu, now do it. Kechu lechem me'eretz Mitzrayim, take kind of whatever you want from the land of Egypt. Agalot letapchem, and wagons for you understand the context. This is the brothers meeting Joseph without knowing it's Joseph yet. L'tavchem v'linshechem, wagons for your children and your wives. Unisatem et avichem, go carry up your father, right? So nisatem has a shva underneath the nun, right? It's not the nisatem, and that's how it would be written for a 3-letter root with the nun is part of the root, and it is active. Shva, not chirik. Okay?
Okay. Unetatem lahem et eretz hagilad b'midbar.
This is Parshat Matot, chapter 32 of 29. Vayomer Moshe Aleihem. This is about the negotiations between the 2.5 tribes that wanted to stay on the eastern side of the Jordan because there was a good flock area there, and how they were going to agree to be chalutzim, right? The original word chalutzim was not farmers wearing kova tembels, but the shock troops that were going in to absorb the initial hits of the battle. Vayomer Moshe Aleihem, Moses said to them, Imi aru v'nei Gad u'vnei Reuven itchem, if the Gadites and the Reubenites go with you et HaYarden to the Jordan, ki chalutz lamilchama lifnei Adonai, to be a shock troop for war in front of God, v'nichbasha ha'aretz lifneichem, and the land will be conquered in front of you, u'netatem lahem et eretz hagilad lachuzah. Look at the vowel underneath the nun, it's a shva, it's a shvana, because if you are the ones who are giving them something, then it's got to be shvana, not a chirik. Although it's not the nitatem, that would have been you will be given. Unitatem, you're going to give them the land of Gilad as inheritance. Okay?
Okay. Unamaltem et besar arlatchem.
Okay.
Right.
Here we go in Breshit, as we understand the commandment of Brit Milah. Maltem et besar orlatchem. You will circumcise the flesh of your foreskins. Not that you will be circumcised. I mean, you will be, but that's not what the verb means. Same vowel, shva under the nun. It's active. It's pa'al, or as Rashi would say, it's in the language of ufe'altem, and that's how it would have had to be. Rashi is saying to Menachem ben Saruk, if our verb was going to be understood in the way he. Menachem ben Saruk is. Okay?
וכך, אני אומר שזאת הנקודה בחיריק מן היסוד היא. ויסוד שם דבר ניצול.
Okay. Do shorter phrases at a time. So therefore.
Sorry. לכך אני אומר, thus I say, שזאת הנקודה בחיריק מן היסוד היא.
What does that mean?
And thus I say that this chirik sign, pointillization, I guess, is basic.
Rashi's word for shoresh is yesod. So he's basically saying that the word zot, that is referring to the nun. That which has a chirik underneath it, in our word, the nitzaltem, is part of the yesod. The nun is part of the root.
Oh, it's part of the root. I see. Okay. V'yesod shem davar nitzul, and the root is the name of the thing that saved.
Right. What he's basically saying is that in case, reader, you're not aware of it, not only is the root that Menachem ben Saruk talking about, yatzal lehatzil, a root, also nun tzadi lamed is a root in and of itself. It's its own word, right? That's what I think means by v'yesod shem davar. This root is its own thing. And what is the thing? The thing is nitzul, exploiting or taking advantage of or stripping, right? Then we have to go from grammar to translation. Vehu
mean halshonot hakvedim, and this is from the usage of the heavy ones?
Right, heavy ones. Is Rashi's way of referring to, I know that we're so deep in the grammatical weeds, a 3-letter roots where the middle letter gets a dagesh in certain forms. So, like the ones he's about to give us. So where the middle letter becomes hardened with a full dagesh in certain forms, particularly in the PL. Okay, go ahead. Kamo,
Dibur, Kippur, Limud, Kishiyidaber.
And go ahead.
Yeah. Do you want to translate? Or for example, divor, speech, kippur. Is that like? I don't know what that is. Gambling. Yom Kippur. Limud, studying.
Right.
Kishiyidaber b'lishon ufa'altem. So that when you speak with the usage of ufa'altem, so that's also the grammatical form
of pa'al. So
pa'al.
When these roots, which are called kvedim roots, we've moved from the discussion of whether or not the nun is the first letter to him putting this root in its larger taxonomy, 3-letter roots, which whose maybe the gerund is dibur, kippur, limud with a hard dagesh dot in the middle one. When you want to put them in pa'al, right, active, go ahead, Yenaked.
Right. Yenaked b'chirik, kemo v'dibartem el hasela.
Okay.
You will.
Now we're back. Now we're back to some examples. Look back at the screen. So now that we've established that the nun is part of the root, and it's part of a larger family of words that when you put them in pa'al or sometimes pl, the second letter has a dagesh. If you want to make it an active, you've got to put a chirik under the letter, not a shva. So let's look at these examples. This is chapter 20 of Bamidbar, verse 8. Kachat hamateh, take this staff, hakel et ha'edah, and bring the community together. Atav Yaron achicha, you and Aaron, your brother. Vedi bartem el hasela, speak to the rock. You know exactly what scene this is, and it's not dib bartem, it's di bartem, active, active, and it's that family of roots. Go ahead.
Okay. V'chi partem et habayit, Yechezkel.
Another Ezekiel quote, Ezekiel 45. Verse 20. V'chein ta'aseh b'shiva b'chodesh. This is what you should do on the 7th day of the month. Me'ish shogeh umifeti, in order to cleanse the temple from a silly or unwise person. V'chi partem et habayit. I'a'eh. Chi partem. Vowel under the chaf is a chirig, and the i'a'eh vowel forms, not I know it sounds funny to say it, but like ours, remember, is ni saltem, active. The first letter is part of the root. You're doing the thing to something. You are atoning or cleansing the bayit, the house.
Right. V'limadatem otam et b'nechem.
Right. This is from the second paragraph of the Shema, chapter 11 of Dvarim, verse 19. V'limadatem otam. You shall teach them. I-a-eh. These are not roots where nun is the first letter. These are a larger family of roots, no matter what the first letter is, where in this form, if it's an active concept, it's an I-a-eh construction. Okay. And that ends the comment to Rashi. So Rashi has spent an enormous time walking us through what this verb is, what this verb isn't, has not changed a whole lot of the meaning, sets up a framework, hopefully, that will help us understand it in the future. And then he doesn't wrap it up. He doesn't give a sermonette at the end. He just says, okay, now you know it, on to the next verse. So I'm going to tee up Joanna, and I'd love for you to share some of what you shared, because I didn't have time to respond to the email, but I was so fascinated by what you came up with, and the floor is yours.
So me being me, I was intrigued by, why is Rashi doing this? It was sort of egging at me a little bit, like it's one too many proof texts, one too many verses, why he feels the need to do this. And where that got me to was first to learn a little bit about our new friend Menachem, and from there a little bit about some major biblical grammarians in the development of biblical grammar. And I think it sheds light on what's going on here. So just to share very briefly, this machberet that has been referred to of Menachem's was simply a dictionary of Hebrew roots as he understood them. And Menachem's theory, which is now clearly discredited, we know is not true, but his theory was that for a letter to be part of a root, it has to be present in every verb conjugation, in every form of speech. If you add a prefix or a suffix to the word, it must be there. So that led to Menachem developing a theory that Hebrew roots could have 1, 2, or 3 letters because they must be in the word at all times in every form. Along comes another grammarian, Dunash, who is born in North Africa, but eventually makes his way to Spain, which is where Menachem is. They meet and they develop a rivalry. And in particular, Dunash critiques about 200 entries in Menachem's dictionary. So that is to say, like, it's one thing if you criticize one entry, like you're basically in agreement, but some significant disagreement. And so the other thing that's important to notice of what happens, this came up last week also, someone was asking about what does Rashi know and, who was in his sphere of influence. Rashi clearly knew of either people who were in Spain or got to Spain, but did not know of North Africans and did not have comprehension of Arabic, which is significant for 2 reasons, because Arabic grammatical structure, which had already been kind of figured out, is very much related to Hebrew. So the Arabic speakers are the ones who are starting to get a grasp on Hebrew grammar. And huge in particular in relation to a guy that I had never heard of until I went down this rabbit hole, Judah ben David Hayuj, who basically is the grandparent, if you will, the first to develop the Hebrew grammatical system, and as we know it today. Everything we know about grammar is based on his work until our own day. So significant for our discussion, what he develops is the 3-letter root system as we know it today, and this whole concept of weak roots where letters may fall away in certain conjugations. While he is just ahead of Rashi's time because he's from Africa and because he speaks Arabic, Rashi does not know of his work. And what appears to be happening in Rashi is Rashi, in essence, is here and elsewhere, starts to develop on his own some of the very same ideas as Hayuj did. And the other significant thing to note is Hayuj is fascinating because while he's from North Africa, he does end up in Spain. He dies. After he passes away, Ibn Ezra comes on the scene, but Ibn Ezra becomes a student of his works. And everything Ibn Ezra does is basically to take Hayuj and translate it into Hebrew, but he's too late for Rashi, and then further develop his ideas. And from there, everything we do about Hebrew grammar today is based on that. So with all of that, what you come to is, we sitting here in the 21st century, look at this. And I mean, even those of us who have the barest understandings of Hebrew grammar take it for granted that there are 3-letter roots and that there are weak verbs. And there's such a thing as a pei nun verb, verbs that start with the letter nun as the first letter of the shoresh. At the time Rashi is writing this, these are possibly new concepts, and possibly as a biblical commentator, I was hoping to find someone who would say this clearly, and I haven't. But I think that quite possibly Rashi is introducing this concept for the first time. So now that's a whole different spin. If you're proposing an idea for the first time, you've got to go through a lot of work to defend and prove what you want to say, as opposed to, for us 21st century biblical students who, accept some of this, for granted with no question.
So some people on the Zoom are thinking to themselves, how many minutes can we possibly spend on a chirik and a shva and a root? And if you're built like me, you're thinking, can we do 3 more hours of just this? Because this is an unbelievably interesting rabbit hole to just imagine. Like we talk and write about Eliezer ben Yehuda's masterful reinvention of the Hebrew language, and we take for granted, as Joanna said, and I just hadn't thought about this so much, that before ben Yehuda, there were other inventors or canonizers, not only of the text itself, but of the language, right? The language developed organically, right? In 3, 5, 8, 9,000 years ago, they weren't sitting down saying, should this be a chirik or a shva? It just develops. And then someone has to systematize it after the fact. So it's fascinating to get a little window into the conversations back and forth between Rashi and his influences, and Rashi, what Joanna is contending, and I can't wait for her to write her article about this, is not just that Rashi is representing that grammar, but is crafting it on some level. I'm totally taken by that idea, and I never had thought about that as a possibility. Rick, and then Matt, and then we're going to get off this verse.
Hi. So I found that Rashi also knew Aharon ben Asher, the last Masoret who set with Shlomo ben Buya the trope, and that's what's in the Damascus, the Aleppo scroll, the dots and the notes and the trope that was set down about the same time, and Rashi knew about it because I think he quoted him in different places. I also wanted to bring up, because I read ahead, how Rashi treats the same word later, if I could. In 1236, it's a nice little sentence. I just like the mathematics. The 12 and 36 is 3 times that, and 36 is 2 times chai. But anyway, there you have Vayinatzlu at Mitzrayim, and there Rashi says nothing. He says the Targum translates this as Verokinu, which we already saw a little. I missed it last week. If you did it, the very beginning of this whole Rashi, he quotes Unclus emptying out up there, but I missed that. But there, it's not V'nitzaltem, it's Vayinatzlu at Mitzrayim. So I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Yeah, I think the first time we looked at this verse, which is now 2 classes ago, we did look at the Unclus, and Unclus doesn't really, is not really a machriya, not really a decider between the 2 possible readings here, because the 2 possible readings on a content level are so similar. He understanding it as emptying it out from, right? L'rokain, probably more like linatzel, to exploit, rather than lahatzil, to remove, but it's hard to know. It could be that Unclus was actually agreeing with Menachem ben Sarup, but we don't really know from just that one word. Larry, Diane, and then Matt was next. Sorry, and then Larry, Diane.
All right, this is just sort of a personal thing. You said it would be fun to spend 3 hours on the Shva, which reminded me of our departed dear friend Rabbi Ronnie Cohen, who long before he was a rabbi, he was a graduate student in linguistics in the 70s at Columbia. And he spent 2 years working on a thesis about the Shva. And at the end, after back and forth with the professors and so on, at the end, after 2 years, he realized that there was something wrong with his theory about the Shva. And he said, to hell with it, and dropped out of graduate school. So there's a certain point. It's a certain point at which you have to stop worrying about the Shva and move on to other things.
I wish I were better with a perfect pun to respond to that, but I can't think of it.
Ronnie was a punster, yes.
Thanks for that. And thanks for reviving a memory of Ronnie who's dearly missed. I think of him every the route we take to walk our dog walks right by his house, so I think of him 3 times a day. And those of you who came to the community later and didn't get to know him, you missed a very special guy. Who, I don't know if you just mentioned this, but he was also an accountant, right? He was an accountant.
He became an accountant.
Yeah. So he loved the specifics numerically, and he loved the specifics, right. On a vowel level. Larry, Diane?
So this is sort of a question and a comment. So are we to understand from all of the things that Rashi said that this is in fact a kind of a command, and you shall despoil, strip, whatever the Egyptians exploit? Yeah, is that?
It's not. I think that Rashi would say that it's not in a tzivui command form. It's in a future tense pa'al active form, saying that you will. It's more like a prediction than a command. But those two things are very similar when someone in authority is speaking to you. If someone in authority is speaking, say, you will take this to the post office and mail it by 3. That's both a prediction and a command. But I think grammatically speaking, he's saying this is the future tense verb in a vav hipuch form of a simple active form, and not necessarily a tzivui.
So I'm wondering if this is, though, kind of a moral statement, which is that the Egyptians actually owe you this because of your servitude, and you are in some sense saving them by forcing them to make restitution, as it were.
Say that again. I'm not following. Because
So,
you're using the word save there intentionally, because save is the way that Menachem ben Saruk was reading the verb, or is that a coincidence?
no, I am. And you're saying Rashi says it's not saved, right, in this case. But I'm wondering if you think about it as save, are we making a moral statement about the obligation of the Egyptians?
Yeah. I feel like someone said a version of this last week, and I was compelled by the notion of it, even though I don't think it's a pshat reading of it. I was compelled by rereading the sense of savior into what an active way that the Israelites are impacting the Egyptians by redeeming the wealth that they acquired, right? It gets very modern, on the backs of the slavery of the Israelites.
Right.
By the Israelites taking it back, they're actually giving back some sense of dignity to Egyptians who otherwise would always be judged as having done the exploitation. So it's a playful idea. I don't know. Rashi certainly doesn't agree with that. And I'm not even sure Menachem ben Saruk was reading it that way, because that would actually have to read beneath saltem, both meaning to save and not to exploit, and in the active, not in the passive, right? That you will somehow save Egypt, and the vowels don't work out there, but it's still an interesting idea.
I have a question for Joanna. And that's, you said that Rashi didn't know of the work of Judah ben David Ayush, but because he was in Africa. But he was in Fez, Morocco, which at the time would have been the same as being part of Spain. It would have been, it's part of the whatever the Islamic state was then. But he also moved. I'm reading this now. I'm reading in Wikipedia. He moved to Cordoba at a young age, and that's where Menachem was as well. So are you suggesting that Hayuz wrote only in Arabic, and that the rest of them were writing in Hebrew? Because I would imagine that in the vernacular, their daily lives, they all would be speaking in Arabic.
Yes. So that is one of the things that I tracked, is which language people wrote in. So Ben Saruk and Ben Labrat, so that is to say Menachem and Dunash both wrote in Hebrew. Amongst other grammarians that I looked at, there seems to be a pattern, and this is stated by other people that I looked at, that Rashi was not familiar with people who were living in what we today know as North Africa and Arabic. And Hayush is interesting because he did travel to Spain, which is huge because of the fact that that's where Ibn Ezra is, right? So even though Ibn Ezra is born later, that's how Ibn Ezra comes to know of his works. So even though he ended up in Spain, the Arabic was still a barrier, and Rashi did not know of him.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to say in response to what you just brought up, Diane, is the fact that the particular verb we're looking at starts with a nun is what throws in some confusion, because if Menachem is correct and the shorish is to save, then we have to ask ourselves what the nun is doing there. And the nun is the indicator of the passive voice. So I think what Rashi's point is not to argue about is it active or command, but is it active or passive? So Rashi's point is, it's a 3-letter root and it's active. Don't look at this nun as an indicator of the passive voice.
Joanna, you know the weather's much nicer in LA than Toronto. And
not to mention Ottawa.
Sports teams are also better.
Okay, I believe we first started reading this Rashi towards the middle end of 2 sessions ago. We've now spent almost 2 full sessions on it, and I almost kind of want to ring a bell and wake everyone else up. Class is now starting, and now we're going to go on to the next verse. Just a heads up that I'm speaking at an online session at exactly 9:30, so I'm going to have to end this class at like 9:25, 9:26 to get off the Zoom and start that one. I need to kind of set that up. So we're going to end.
Can I just say Yasher Koach, Joanna? That was amazing, just absolutely amazing.
Totally agree, Joanna. So much so that history only goes in one direction. So this happened, but I can't imagine how much less we would have enjoyed and understood this verse had we happened to have gotten here before you were part of this class. So thank you so much for doing that research and sharing this. And I want you to write it up. I want you to write it up somewhere. Okay. Matt, I need to give you another verse because that was just brutal and not particularly satisfying. And I think you're going to get 2 verses, depending on how far we get, because Rashi doesn't speak until the second verse, and we usually the reader goes until he or she gets a Rashi. So, chapter 4 of the book of Shemot, moving right along, Vaya'an.
Okay, Vaya'an Moshe. Ya'an, is that like from he answered? He spoke up? Something like that. Vaya'an Moshe Vayomar, and said, Vehen lo ya'aminu li, and what if they don't believe me? V'lo yishme'u b'koli, and they won't hear my voice. Ki yomru, and they will say, or they would say, Lo nir'a alecha Adonai, that God did not appear to you.
Good. So a couple of things before we kind of go into it deeper. Yes, Vaya'an is the root ayin nun he, which means to answer, like Ze'eli anu v'amru. They repeated and they said in biblical song. Some scholars believe that it's specifically referring to an antiphonal presentation where I say something, you say something, I say something, you say something. Bata'an Miriam, that Miriam was engaging everyone at the sea in a back and forth response. It's also the root from which that great midrash in the Haggadah, that why is it called lechem oni? The matzah is lechem oni. It's not just the bread of affliction, but it's the bread of answers. It's the bread upon which we ask questions and give good answers. That's a midrash on it, right? So we've been in a very long soliloquy by God, and now finally Moshe answers, not antiphonally. They're not going back and forth. It's just literally here the word answer. I was fascinated by your interjection, which may or may not be pshat, of the what if, because the vehain is not necessarily a what if. You translated it, Matt, as Moses said to God, what if they do not believe me? Which is a softer response by Moshe than what I think the word more plainly suggests was, but behold, they're not going to believe me. Not a what if they don't, but a near certainty that they will not, right? Now, all this is guesswork because we don't know exactly what behain means. That hain is part of hinei, behold, here. And is this a hesitating response, or is this there's no way it's going to happen? So in a second, we'll look at some translations of it and see what other...
Yeah, I have to say that I think that what I translated all of it, except I have to think that the what if you had asked, though, Safari translates it as what if they do not believe me.
I didn't hear the first 2 sentences you just said, though. So can you say that the first 2 sentences again? You went out.
I'm saying that the what if, I think, comes from Safari, not from me.
I see. So let's look at some others. JPS translates it in our Eitz Chaim Chumash, and I had it, but now I turned the page. So that's JPS. But Moses spoke up and said, interesting, JPS interjects not only a what if, but a but. That vav hayipuch, he turns into a but. Mm. Moses spoke up and said, what if they do not believe me and do not listen to me, but say, the Lord did not appear to you? ? Right? That's JPS. Everett Fox. Moshe spoke up, he said, but they will not trust me. More plain, right? That it's not going to happen, God, and will not hearken to my voice. Indeed, they will say, Yah Yud He Vav He has not been seen by you, has not been revealed to you. So Everett Fox takes it more plainly. Let's hear some others. I'm always interested, particularly in the R.E.A. Kaplan translation. So Larry, Dan, do you want to read your two favorites, the Alter and the Kaplan?
Sure. Kaplan is the most interesting, of course. He puts in a brackets, but there's no note about it. So here's what it says. When Moses, bracket, was able to, close bracket, reply, so it's kind of inferring that he was like shaken or something.
Yeah, or waiting or something.
So that's, to say he was waiting is a good observation. But they will not believe me. They will not listen to me. They will say, God did not appear to you. And Alter says, and Moses answered and said, but look, they will not believe me, nor will they heed my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. Can I just make one comment? And it may be wrong. If you go back to the beginning of chapter 3 and you read straight through, every time Moses speaks, he says the same thing. He says, but first of all, he says, talk about Pharaoh. But why will Pharaoh listen to me? Then he says, but the elders will ask, what's your name? And now he's saying, but they will not believe me. So the whole thing is one long dialogue with Moses saying, but who am I? No one's going to take my word for it.
He doesn't want the job.
Right.
He doesn't believe it can be successful. And either he's modest, or he's the modest man who doth protest too much, or he doesn't. And it's also unclear, does he not believe in himself or does he not believe in them? Right? And Rashi is going to quote a midrash on the next verse that giving away the story a little bit, that's going to chastise Moshe not for his lack of belief in himself, but for his lack of belief in the people. Micha Goodman gave a class last summer on the book of Jonah. Every time Micha looks at a new book of the Bible, I feel like I'm reading it for the first time. And he made a very interesting comparison between Jonah and Moshe, two reluctant prophets. And in his beautiful turn of phrase, he said, Moshe didn't want the job because he feared he would be unsuccessful. And Jonah didn't want the job because he feared he would be successful. Right? Moshe didn't want the job because he believed that they wouldn't listen to him, and therefore that it would be a failure. And Jonah didn't want the job because he feared they would listen to him, they would repent, and then they would never really pay a price for having been disobedient to God in the first place. It's such an interesting contrast on the hesitancies of Moshe and Jonah as they were tapped on the shoulder to be a prophet. So here, Moshe, you're right, keeps, if we, what is it, the Jefferson's Bible took out all the commentary and just uplifted Jesus's words themselves, right? And everything else got crossed out, kind of.
He took out all the supernatural events in the Bible.
Right. So if we just isolate Moses's words over these chapters, you see a guy who doesn't want to be there, doesn't want to go to Egypt, doesn't think it's going to work, and is showing both a lack of trust in himself and of them, of the Redeemer and the redeemed to be. Yeah. Norm, and then Renee, and then Rebecca.
Zilberman translates it just like you did. Moshe answered and said, but behold, they won't believe me, nor hearken to my voice, and they will say Adonai has not appeared to you. And there it is.
Great. So, so far, the only one that translates it as a what if is the JPS. I would love to interview them and ask them what was animating that decision. Renee?
Saperstein says, Moses responded and said, but they will not believe me and they will not heed my voice, for they will say Hashem did not appear to you. And Everett Fox says, Moshe spoke up. He said, but they will not trust me and will not hearken to my voice. Indeed, they will say, Yud-He Vav-He has not been seen by you, ...
Yeah.
Exclamation.
And before we get to Rebecca and Barry, just a note that we kind of glossed over this. There are two verbs in the beginning of this sentence when there could have been one, right? Maybe that kind of speaks to what you were saying. Was it Larry who was reading? I forgot already. The one who said when he was finally able to speak.
Aryeh Kaplan.
Aryeh Kaplan, right? Vaya'an vayomer. He answered and he said. Well, vayomer would have been enough, and vaya'an would have been enough. What is the vaya'an and vayomer together? Right? Is this just like a he mustered up the ability to give an answer to God, and this is the content of the answer, right? Everett Fox, an interesting note just on that. Spoke up and said, Everett Fox writes, this coupling of verbs is common in Ugaritic and Hebrew to denote a new thought on the speaker's part. That rather than it be just the next step in the exchange, it's as if something new is popping up, which is so interesting when you think of what Larry just offered, which is that it's not new at all. It's actually Moshe's trope throughout this entire stretch. Rebecca?
So I had two thoughts about the hen. One is that it also means yes or agreement. Mm-hmm. And so it could be Moshe sort of agreeing with himself again that they won't believe him. But my other thought was if you just read the sentence before where God is talking about the women going to their neighbors and taking their gold and silver and so on. And then if you could read the hen as plural female hen, in which case he's answering, and the women will not believe me, in which case it's a very direct, response to the previous sentence.
That's lovely and playful. I really do like it. It would grammatically force the ya'aminu to have a taf in the front, but tamina, it would be that na ending. But I love the evocativeness of the hen as a they. You're reading the vehen as a yes is also interesting. It reminds me this is going to be like such a obscure, an odd reference in the Rashi Class. One of my favorite comics is Gary Gulman, a Jewish guy, really funny from the Boston area, very clean and very witty and like really smart stuff. Like his stand-up routines are in some ways lectures, and they're beautiful. And he has a whole stretch on the phrase of yeah, no, when someone says yeah, no, and the vehain lo, you're almost reading as yeah, God, but no, they're not going to believe me. Yeah, I hear you, but it's not going to happen. So if you want 4 minutes to treat yourself, look up Gary Gulman, yeah, no. I think it's in his Trader Joe bit if you can't find it anywhere else. Barry, and you might probably be our last contributor today because I'm going to have to get off early, as I said.
So just thinking on the bright side of Moshe, he's a strategic thinker. I mean, he's a shepherd, but he's a strategic thinker. He needs a backup. Before I go into this, what's my backup going to be?
Good. So wants to make sure if Plan A doesn't happen, what's Plan B? So that's the first verse of the fourth chapter. And let me just read the next verse very quickly. It's a short verse, and then we'll do the Rashi on it next week. Actually, Matt, you read it. You're our reader, so finish it up quickly.
Vayomer elav Adonai ma zeh v'yadecha vayomer mateh. And God said to him, "What is that in your hand?" And he answered, a staff. Good.
And just to set up where Rashi is going to go on this is one of the places in the Torah where you have a kri and a ketiv, or it's actually not exactly a kri ketiv. It's just two different. It's sort of a kri ketiv where it's written in mem zayin hey in the Torah, but it's also understood as two words, ma zeh. So I don't know depending on which version you're looking at, what does it say in the time? I heard that.
Mine has mem zayin hey, and then ma dash and zeh are separately in both bracketed.
Right. So Rashi is going to going to go into the question of one word or two words, and then just notice that the two halves of the verse have the word mazeh. If mazeh is one word, which normally wouldn't be, then it has mazeh and mateh, which is they're basically like the same construct, just changing a consonant in the middle of it.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.